The first things I felt were the electrodes in the catheter. Still not fully understanding what had just transpired, I asked the nurse to let me up to use the bathroom. She unhooked me, visibly irritated, and I waddled off down the hall. Struggling to pee and still nodding off, I heard angry knocks on the door. "Hurry up! You're not supposed to be in there that long." The nurse wouldn't relent. I wonder why she was being such a bitch. Finishing up, I stumbled back to the bed I was assigned to and asked when I could leave. I was firmly reminded that if I left, the police would be called. Oh, what the fuck? I learned that the few pills I had swallowed mindlessly after doing my morning shot and heading out the door for a doctor's appointment to get more of the pills and eventually work had snuck up on me. This manifested as a code blue in the waiting room of my doctor, arguably the ideal place to code if there was one. Because I had a couple syringes full of heroin in my purse, I was facing possession charges if I didn't agree to some form of drug treatment. I was 19 and barely conscious during this period of time, and this meant that my parents had been called. The gravity of the situation sunk in despite the lingering sedation. Shit. My parents, living in another state, now knew I was strung out on heroin. The one thing I had done my best to keep from them over the last year was now family knowledge. I had hardly any credibility with them, and it was now clear that I would have none for the foreseeable future. Their communication with me vacillated between livid and filled with doom. The problem child was now a textbook case. Shit. Now my parents know, and I have to kick. The appalling weight of the latter realization, coupled with the anxiety and dread of the first, left me in a state of nervous despondency. As I was still eligible for my adoptive father's military insurance, I was sent to the Naval Hospital. If you're unfamiliar with the setting of a naval hospital, just imagine an even more sterile and stiff emotional milieu than your typical hospital setting. I had an IV placed in my neck because all of my other veins had collapsed due to my frequent use of old, dull needles and lack of skill in phlebotomy. My body felt cold, and I was painfully aware of how much hospital staff don't like drug users. A positive UA result might as well be convicted arsonist written in your chart. I was wheeled to a room which was already occupied by an older woman. The curtain between us helped my desire to not be perceived, and hearing her family lovingly visit drove my own shame deeper. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" I was here because the detox center did not have any available beds for a few days, so that meant I was stuck in this hospital bed unless I left and would rather kick in jail. I surrendered to my fate and did my best to communicate the amount I was using under the belief that I would be provided a medical detox, seeing as how I was in a medical setting, only to be told I would have to wait until the doctor saw me in the morning. 1 gram of heroin a day, and lately 4 milligrams of Klonopin, a benzodiazepine, and however much of Soma, a now defunct muscle relaxer that was a euphoric way of getting drunk without ingesting alcohol. This combination could be potentially lethal to detox from abruptly, but they seemed to think it was no big deal. Despite knowing the need to kick my habit had been inevitable, I still wasn't prepared. Reading William S. Burroughs and listening to the Velvet Underground should have given me a warning, yet our penchant for cognitive dissonance can be loud and strong. This was IRL, the real lesson. As my veins blew up like flooded purple rivers and my muscles became stiff and swollen from intramuscular injections, as I became more and more desperate for funds to stay well, and as I lived solely for the time spent nodding off on the couch while the day turned to night, I still managed to promise myself I would kick tomorrow, like Jane said. Just find an AA meeting, right? The doctor comes in with a gaggle of trainees. He taps my foot as he's explaining to them, "Yeah, opiate withdrawal. Nothing we can do. We just monitor fluid levels. They'll be fine." I speak up. "Can I please get sleep medication? I can't sleep." He walks out of the room without acknowledging me. Why was the doctor being such an asshole? As awful as I felt, I was quiet and undemanding, so I couldn't understand where the terrible bedside manner was coming from. The IV in my neck starts to ache, especially each time they flush it with saline. Stomach roiling, the bedside commode was a necessary companion as my body repeatedly evacuated anything left inside of it, even when I thought nothing could be left. I had no appetite and felt nauseated at the stench of hospital food. Insomnia left me viewing the 30-year anniversary footage of the Jonestown Massacre that played endlessly on the History Channel. The macabre TV programming accentuated the inner darkness I sunk into, as I could not muster any feeling of motivation for a life outside of heroin use. Feeling as though I'm in a bizarre medical twilight zone, I observe how some staff act like I don't exist, some are outright hostile towards me, but my night nurse is an angel. I think that may have even been his name. He offers me nausea medication at night that ever so subtly brings some relaxation to my otherwise stiff and cramped body. He asks me about myself, about what I want for my future. He listens as I describe the unhealthy relationship I was in with a 34-year-old man who sometimes stole my drugs and lied about it, who in many ways was the willing catalyst for my dependence. What stood out about Angel was his non-judgment and kindness. He encouraged me to see the value in life as I expressed disappointment about surviving the most recent overdose, about how in that moment I could see no use in a life without heroin. His presence was gentle and loving, and he may have been the only medical personnel in the ICU that saw me as a human being instead of a lousy drug addict. 48 hours in, I'm attempting to arrange some drug delivery by the clueless 34-year-old man and a friend. He agrees to bring some pre-made shots as he can hear the desperation in my voice. He arrives in the hospital, and I watch through the door as he's asked to leave his bag at the nurse's desk. Go figure. Somehow the greasy mullet, tattoos, pinned pupils, and blood-stained pants didn't provide a decent disguise. I am not at all happy to see him at this point. Seriously, you didn't think to put it in your pockets or pants. I angrily snap. I tell him to leave after making him promise to have a shot ready under the sink of the bathroom when I stop at home to get my clothes. This scene reflects my whole teenage era. All of my boyfriends were simply access points to substances. I lived for the Neptunian liminality of the midway point between consciousness and unconsciousness. Finding the sweet spot between slightly conscious and blacked out was the game I most enjoyed playing in this body, though one could argue I sucked at it due to how often I wound up slumped over and drooling in a corner or on a stranger's bed. My legs cramped as I intermittently hit them with my fists to counteract the aches. As I laid there incapacitated, vacillating between hot, sweaty, and freezing, I considered my immediate possibilities. I could leave and do my best to slip under the legal radar, though now I would have no job to return to. Sex work for drugs was an option I had already ventured into, and I reflected on how to disconnect my emotions further to engage in this option as I figured out new employment. I felt my limp body shake as I mapped out the limited possibilities in my mind. As long as I have access to heroin, I could let other variables fall where they may. I didn't want to return to drinking alcohol, so I passed the hours feeling both incredibly sick and semi-hopeful that once I could get well, I would simply figure it out. I'm so mired in my dependence that the only appealing way out of this self-made predicament is death. I couldn't imagine another way to live. What do you mean, go to college and work a job? I was raised to believe that being an artist was a waste of time, that money was the most important goal in life, and that women could never be as successful as men. I was repeatedly told how I'm smart, but lazy, angry, and bad. I faced the call with my family in a meek, subdued state, anticipating the raised voices and harsh tone. I can't believe you did this. You've disrupted our lives. What is wrong with you? You're gonna die. I can do nothing but cringe and apologize, knowing they won't ever understand the factors that led me to said choices. I'd experienced disappointment being the primary reflection lodged at me through my teen years, and as I sat dissociated in the sweaty bed, I resigned to my role. Angel's insistence on seeing possibilities was the first hand in the dark extended to begin the decades-long journey of navigating family and societal projections, shedding deep self-hatred and doubt with a capital D, and finding a connection with something deeper than our usual physical reality. 10 years later, standing in the ocean at the beach with my daughter, I gaze at her with such admiration for the person she's becoming. The reflection of light from the flowing water dances on her face, and I reflect how I never could have imagined being in this moment. I consider the ways the systems work against her. I want nothing more than to continually build her self-confidence and self-trust as she grows into the person she's meant to be. I smile as she hands me a shell and make a mental promise to prioritize connection through her growth. Dr. Gabor Mate points out that our society is breeding addictions left and right with its mundane consumerist agenda and overworked and underpaid citizens, while the current street drug supply is poisoned. Treatment options remain heavily stagnant in their availability, messaging, and protocols. And our current administration thinks that going to war with cartels is what will stop overdoses. Ultimately, what I needed was compassion, as well as belonging, meaning, and connection.
Becca Evans, ladies and gentlemen. Becca Evans.